Li Zheng, a native of Longxi, was gifted with both erudition and talent. In the final years of the Tianbao era, he passed the imperial examinations at a young age and was appointed as an official in Jiangnan. However, his stubborn nature and excessive self-confidence made him disdainful of holding a low-ranking official position. After resigning from his post, he returned to his hometown, severed ties with others, and devoted himself to poetry. He believed it was better to leave a poetic legacy 100 years after his death than to bow for long before vulgar high officials. Yet, his poetic fame did not rise, and his life grew increasingly difficult by the day. Li Zheng began to feel anxious. Around this time, his appearance became severe. His flesh wasted away, revealing his bones, and only the sharpness of his eyes remained, with no trace of the once plump and handsome youth who had passed the imperial exams. A few years later, unable to endure poverty, he finally bent his will for the sake of his wife and children's livelihood and headed east again to accept a local official position. This was partly due to his half-despair over his poetry. His former peers had already risen to high positions, and the fact that he had to take orders from those he once dismissed as dullards deeply wounded the pride of the once brilliant Li Zheng. He harbored discontent, and his increasingly unrestrained, mad-like temperament became harder to control. A year later, while traveling on official duty, he stayed by the Ruoshui River and finally went mad. One night, he suddenly changed his expression, rose from his bed, shouted incomprehensible things, and dashed outside into the darkness. He never returned. Even searching the nearby mountains and fields yielded no clues. No one knew what became of Li Zheng afterward. The following year, a man named Yuan, who was a censor from the Chen district, received an imperial order to head to Lingnan and stayed in Shangyu along the way. When he tried to depart early the next morning while it was still dark, the station official said, "A man-eating tiger appears on the road ahead, so travelers can only pass during the day. It's still early morning, so it would be better to wait a little longer." However, relying on the number of his entourage, Yuan ignored the official's words and set off. As they proceeded through the forested grasslands by the light of the remaining moon, sure enough, a fierce tiger leaped out from the thicket. The tiger seemed about to pounce on Yuan, but suddenly turned and hid back in the thicket. From within the thicket, a human voice repeatedly murmured, "That was close." Yuan recognized the voice. In shock and fear, he immediately called out, "Isn't that the voice of my friend Li Zheng?" Yuan had passed the imperial examinations in the same year as Li Zheng and was his closest friend, as Li Zheng had few friends. Perhaps Yuan's gentle nature did not clash with Li Zheng's stern character. There was no response from the thicket for a while. Only occasionally, a faint sound like sobbing could be heard. After some time, a low voice replied, "Indeed, I am Li Zheng from Longxi." Yuan forgot his fear, dismounted from his horse, approached the thicket, and exchanged nostalgic greetings after a long time. Then he asked why Li Zheng would not come out of the thicket. Li Zheng's voice answered, "I have become a monstrous being now. How could I possibly show such a miserable form before an old friend? Moreover, if I reveal myself, I would surely evoke feelings of fear and disgust in you. However, meeting an old friend unexpectedly like this makes me forget my shame and feel nostalgic. Please, even if just for a short while, could you talk to me as if I were still your friend Li Zheng, without minding my current ugly form?" In retrospect, it was a strange thing, but at that moment, Yuan accepted this supernatural event quite naturally and did not find it strange at all. He ordered his subordinates to halt the procession and stood by the thicket, beginning a conversation with the unseen voice. After discussing the rumors from the capital, news of old friends, Yuan's current position, and Li Zheng's congratulations on it, in the familiar tone of those who were close in their youth, Yuan asked how Li Zheng had come to be in his current situation. The voice from the thicket spoke as follows. "It was about a year ago. I was traveling and stayed by the Ruoshui River one night. After falling asleep once, I suddenly awoke to hear someone calling my name outside. Responding to the voice, I stepped outside, and the voice persistently beckoned me from the darkness. Without thinking, I ran after the voice. As I ran, lost in a daze, the path led into the mountains, and before I knew it, I was grasping the ground with both hands as I ran. It felt as if my entire body was filled with power, and I leaped over rocks with ease. When I realized it, hair seemed to be growing on my hands and elbows. As it grew a little brighter, I looked at my reflection in a mountain stream and saw that I had already become a tiger. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. Then I thought it must be a dream. I had experienced dreams before where I knew I was dreaming. However, when I had to accept that it was not a dream, I was stunned. And I was afraid. I thought anything could happen and was deeply afraid. But I don't know why this happened. We truly understand nothing. It is our fate as living beings to quietly accept what is imposed on us without reason and live without understanding why. I immediately thought of death. However, at that moment when I saw a rabbit dart past before my eyes, the human within me vanished instantly. When the human within me awoke again, my mouth was stained with the rabbit's blood, and rabbit fur was scattered around. This was my first experience as a tiger. Since then, I cannot bear to recount what I have continued to do. However, there are always a few hours in a day when the human heart returns. During such times, I can speak human words, endure complex thoughts, and recite passages from the classics, just as I did in the past. When I look at the aftermath of my brutal actions as a tiger with my human heart and reflect on my fate, it is the most pitiful, terrifying, and infuriating time. However, even those few hours of returning to being human are gradually shortening as the days go by. Until now, I wondered why I had become a tiger, but the other day, I suddenly realized I was wondering why I had once been human. This is terrifying. Soon, the human heart within me will be completely buried in the habits of the beast and disappear, just like the foundations of an old palace gradually buried in sediment. When that happens, I will eventually forget my past, run wild as a mere tiger, and even if I meet you on the road as I did today, I will not recognize you as an old acquaintance and will feel no regret in tearing you apart and eating you. Indeed, whether beast or human, perhaps we were originally something else. At first, we remember that. But gradually we forget and convince ourselves that we have always been in our current form. No, such things don't matter. If the human heart within me completely disappears, perhaps I will be happier. Yet the human within me finds that thought terrifying beyond measure. Oh, how terrifying, sorrowful, and heartrending it is to lose the memory of having been human. This feeling is understood by no one. No one unless they have been in the same situation as me. By the way, yes. Before I completely cease to be human, there is one thing I would like to ask of you. Yuan and his party held their breath, listening intently to the mysterious voice coming from the thicket. The voice continued, "It is nothing else. I originally intended to make a name for myself as a poet. However, before achieving that goal, I have come to this fate. I have written hundreds of poems, but of course they have not yet been published. The whereabouts of my manuscripts are now unknown. Among them, there are still several dozen poems I remember. I would like you to record these for me. I do not wish to pose as a full-fledged poet through this. I do not know the quality of my works, but at any rate, if I do not pass on even a part of what I was so obsessed with throughout my life, losing my fortune and sanity, I cannot rest in peace, even in death." Yuan ordered his subordinates to take up their brushes and write down the words of the voice from the thicket. Li Zheng's voice resonated clearly from within the thicket. In total, about 30 poems, both long and short, were recorded, each with a high level of refinement and exceptional intent, making the author's extraordinary talent evident with just one reading. However, Yuan, while impressed, vaguely felt the following. Certainly, the author's talent belongs to the first rank, but as it stands, there seems to be something lacking, in a very subtle way, for it to become a first-rate work. After reciting his old poems, Li Zheng's voice suddenly changed its tone, as if mocking himself, and said, "It's embarrassing, but even now, even in this miserable state, I sometimes dream of my poetry collection being placed on the desks of the elegant people of Chang'an. It's a dream I have while lying in a cave. Laugh at me, the pitiful man who failed to become a poet and turned into a tiger." Yuan listened sadly, remembering the self-deprecating habit of the young Li Zheng from the past. "Yes. Speaking of jokes, shall I compose an impromptu poem about my current feelings? As proof that the former Li Zheng still lives within this tiger." Yuan once again instructed his subordinates to transcribe this. The poem read as follows. "By chance I was struck by madness, becoming something beyond the ordinary. Misfortunes accumulated, leaving no escape. Today who could withstand these claws and fangs? Back then, both my fame and achievements were highly esteemed. Though I am now a different being hidden in the grass, you are already riding the wave of success with great vigor. This evening, the valleys and mountains are bathed in bright moonlight. I cannot recite a long poem, but I simply gaze quietly. At that moment, the waning moon cast a cold light, and the white dew settled damply on the ground, while the cold wind passing through the trees heralded the approach of dawn. People had already forgotten the strangeness of the event and quietly lamented the misfortune of this poet. Li Zheng's voice resumed once more. Earlier, I said I didn't understand why I met such a fate, but upon reflection, certain things come to mind. When I was human, I avoided interactions with others. People called me arrogant or haughty, but no one knew it was almost akin to a sense of shame. Of course, I won't say that I, once called a prodigy in my hometown, lacked self-esteem. However, it was a timid kind of self-esteem. Though I aspired to make a name for myself in poetry, I did not willingly seek a mentor or engage with fellow poets to hone my skills. On the contrary, I did not consider it honorable to mingle with the common folk. All of this was due to my timid self-esteem and haughty sense of shame. Fearing that I was not a gem, I did not dare to endure hardships to polish myself, and half believing that I should be a gem, I could not associate with ordinary people. Gradually, I distanced myself from society and people, and as a result of my indignation and shame, I further fattened my inner timid self-esteem. It is said that every person is a beast tamer, and the beast in question is each person's temperament. In my case, this haughty sense of shame was the beast. It harmed me, tormented my wife and children, hurt my friends, and ultimately transformed my appearance to match my inner self. Looking back now, I realize I wasted the little talent I had. While I played with empty aphorisms like, "Life is too long to achieve nothing, but too short to achieve something," in reality, cowardly fears of exposing my lack of talent and laziness in avoiding hard work were all that defined me. There are many who, with far less talent than I, became distinguished poets because they diligently honed their skills. Now that I have become a tiger, I finally realize this. When I think of it, I still feel a burning regret in my chest. I can no longer live as a human. Even if I were to compose an excellent poem in my mind now, how could I present it? Moreover, my mind is increasingly becoming that of a tiger with each passing day. What should I do? What of my wasted past? I become overwhelmed. At such times, I climb the rocks at the peak of the mountain over there and howl into the empty valley. I want to express this burning sorrow to someone. Last night, too, I howled at the moon over there. I wondered if someone could understand this suffering. But the beasts hear my voice and only cower in fear. The mountains, trees, moon, and dew all think nothing more than that a tiger is raging and howling. Even if I leap to the heavens and prostrate myself on the ground in lamentation, no one understands my feelings. Just as no one understood my sensitive inner self when I was human. My fur is wet not only from the night dew. Finally, the darkness around began to fade. Passing through the trees, the mournful sound of a horn at dawn began to echo from somewhere. It was time to say goodbye. The time to become intoxicated, to return to being a tiger, was approaching, said Li Zheng's voice. But before we part, I have one more request. It concerns my wife and children. They are still in Ruoshui. Of course, they cannot know of my fate. When you return from the south, could you tell them that I have already died? Please never reveal today's events. It is a brazen request, but if you could take pity on their loneliness and weakness and ensure they never go hungry or cold on the road, it would be the greatest favor to me. As he finished speaking, a wailing voice came from the grass. Yuan, too, with tears in his eyes, replied that he would gladly comply with Li Zheng's wishes. However, Li Zheng's voice quickly returned to its earlier self-mocking tone and said, "In truth, this is what I should have asked first if I were human. It is because I am a man who worries more about his meager poetry than about his starving and freezing wife and children that I have fallen into such a beastly state. And, to add further, when you return from Lingnan, please do not take this path. For by then I may be intoxicated and unable to recognize a friend, and I might attack. Also, after we part now, when you climb the hill 100 paces ahead, please look back. I will show you my current form once more. This is not to boast of bravery. By showing you my ugly form, I hope to dissuade you from wanting to pass through here and meet me again." Yuan spoke heartfelt words of farewell toward the grass and mounted his horse. From the grass came a sorrowful cry that could not be contained. Yuan, too, looked back at the grass many times, tears in his eyes as he set off. When the group reached the top of the hill, they turned as instructed and gazed at the grassy meadow they had just traversed. Suddenly, a tiger sprang from the thicket onto the path. It looked up at the moon, which had already lost its white glow, and let out 2 or 3 roars before leaping back into the thicket, vanishing from sight once more.